You know, they tell you not to pick up hitchhikers, and when I was younger, I always thought that was a very cynical way to view people, assuming that they were inherently up to no good. However, as an adult, and having had experienced something almost terrible happen to me in one of the most unforeseen ways, I'm certainly wary of roadside travelers. You see, I was driving down the road about 5 years ago, and it wasn't on the highway or anything, but the speed limit was 45, which to someone standing still is pretty fast. As I was making my way down the road, I noticed an older woman standing along the side of the road. She looked to be around 50 years old, and in her arms, she was cradling what looked like a blue blanket. So immediately I assumed it was a mother and her child stranded on the side of the road. I decided to pull up to the woman and ask her if everything was okay, and that was when she told me that her ex-husband had kicked her and her baby out on the side of the road after the two had an argument. So I asked if I could help in any way, and she asked if it wouldn't be too much trouble on my part to give her a ride to town, which was only about 2 miles away. I figured it was no problem. The only issue was that I didn't have a car seat for the baby, though she assured me that since it was such a short ride, she would hold him in her arms as long as I drove slow and safely. So she hopped in the car and we were off, and about a minute into the drive, I couldn't help but notice that she hadn't taken her eyes off of me. It was like she was staring daggers into my head. And when I finally turned to face her, I noticed that she had put the blanket down on her lap. It was empty. She hadn't been carrying a child at all. Instead, in her right hand, she was now wielding a small knife of sorts. As soon as my eye line went toward the knife, the woman began to get very aggressive. She began yelling at me, but I couldn't make out a single word that she was saying. I begged her to please calm down, just tell me what she wanted. All I can really remember is asking her not to hurt me. This was when she pushed the knife lightly against the side of my neck and told me not to try anything. All she wanted was my car and my phone, and then everything would be okay. She told me to slowly pull over, and I complied without question. I was fully prepared to give her my car. I knew that my life was worth more than my belongings. But then she made a mistake I would have never expected her to make. After I put the car in park, instead of forcing me out of the car and then hopping into the driver's seat herself, the woman with the knife unlocked her door and got out of the car. She told me to stay there, and she began to walk around to the driver's side. I saw the opportunity and threw my car in reverse. I pushed the gas down just enough to gain traction, and then I forced it into reverse. Once I was about 100 feet down the road from the woman, I put the car back into drive and sped past her as fast as I could. After I got back to my house, I notified the police, and they said they would look into the situation. But other than that, I haven't heard anything. All I know is that looks can be deceiving. I thought I was helping an innocent woman and her child, but in reality, I almost became a victim. It was 1975, and around that time, it wasn't uncommon to find someone who was walking alongside of the road looking for a ride. Sometimes it was a short distance. Other times, people were making their way across the country. I happened to be driving back from a small trip that I took during summer vacation, and I was a few hours away from home. The route that I plotted out for myself on the map was taking me through a series of back roads at the moment. It was a nice little scenic road with lots of trees, so driving along listening to some tunes was pretty peaceful. And as I was chugging along, I thought I could see something on the side of the road in the distance. I thought it might be a deer or something, so I began to slow down. And as I got closer, it was unmistakably a young man. He didn't seem like he was out to hurt anyone, so I decided to slow down and see if he needed a ride in the direction I was heading. Without hesitation, the man, who seemed very grateful, said that he would go as far as I would be willing to take him, and I didn't question it. I figured I could drop him off at a truck stop or something, and he could get to his destination from there. So we hopped in and we took off, and at first it was great to have someone to talk to. We jammed out to some music and things were a blast. Then out of nowhere, I could feel him get a little tense, and he began to lower himself in his seat a bit. That's when I saw it, a sign that said, "Warning, hitchhikers might be escaped convicts." And sure enough, after making it past a group of trees, I could see a large sign and a gate for a prison to my right. My new passenger must have seen me notice it, because right then he said, "Just keep driving." I listened to all his instructions, which ended up leading us off the back road and down a small trail about 5 miles away from the prison. It was there that he forced me out of the car, and instead of just driving away, he followed me, picked something up off the ground, and then swung it at my head. The next thing I remember is waking up. It was sunrise at that point. I was still on the trail, but my car and the young man were long gone. I never saw that car or the person again. It turned out that he was indeed a prisoner who had escaped that night. He stole clothes from a guard's locker somehow and managed to pull himself off as just a random person looking for a ride. He was apparently incarcerated for manslaughter, so I count myself as lucky to be alive. It was 2002, and I decided that it was time for me to make something of myself. However, I always had a tendency to backtrack on my goals. Something that a lot of people told me was that I never give myself time to relax. So I was going to take the year off and travel across the country. I had saved up some money from the years of working, and I did the math. If I spent my money sparingly and I picked up some odd jobs along the way, I should have been more than capable of lasting the year on what I had saved. My plan was simple. I took a flight from Chicago to New York, and from there, I would travel around each state to see what the rest of the country had to offer outside of my small hometown. Things started off really well. For the first few weeks, I traveled via bus or train from city to city, enjoying as much as I could while remaining on my budget. Something I quickly found out, that it was fairly hard to snag a quick, paying job in a town you were only going to be in for a day or two. This meant that I would have to figure out a way to save a bit of money, and to be honest, I probably went about the situation the wrong way, because for some reason, the best way I could think of to save money would be if I could find a cheaper way to travel. That was when I decided to try my hand at hitchhiking. Excuse the pun. I walked along the side of a highway in Virginia for about 45 minutes, alternating between which hand I was using to attempt to flag someone down. And finally, I was happy to see a small 2-door sedan slowly pull off. As I approached the passenger side door, I noticed that it was only the driver in the car. He seemed like a clean-cut and older gentleman who had no facial hair, but wore circular glasses like Lenin. He asked where I was heading, and I explained to him that any town with a cheap place to stay would be great, and he said he could drop me off in a city about 10 miles away, which sounded amazing at the time. So I thanked him graciously and hopped into the passenger seat of his car. At first, things seemed like they were going great, and it turned out that he apparently grew up not too far from me, or at least that's what he told me. Maybe he was just trying to get me to lower my guard. After we passed an off-ramp that I thought was going to take us to the city he told me about, I asked him how far away we are, and his answer was one that I never wanted to hear. He said, "We're about 3 hours away from your new home." I was confused. I began to chuckle a bit, hoping that it was some weird joke, that I didn't understand. That was when I saw him press the switch to lock the doors. "What are you doing?" I asked. That's when I saw him pull a gun out from the panel of his door. He pointed the handgun in my direction and told me to just relax. And I don't know what came over me, but I knew I had to do something. I reached for the gun in hopes of either getting it from him or distracting him enough to crash his car, but he was quicker. I didn't feel the bullet hit me, but the ringing in my ears was enough to make me almost pass out. The stranger that I had entrusted had just shot me. We drove for a little while longer. I couldn't bring myself to speak. I was so dazed by the situation. The bullet had entered in the left side of my chest. I felt my eyes growing heavy, and I could hear him muttering to himself. Everything after that came to me in pieces. I vaguely remember pulling off of the highway. Then we were in the woods. I was pulled from the car and left lying next to a tree. I'll never forget the relief it felt when I heard his tires skid as he pulled away. I think he thought I was dead or going to die. Hell, I did too. Lucky for me, I still had my phone. I was able to call emergency services. It took them some time to find me, and by the time they got there, I had already passed out, assuming I would never wake up again. Thankfully, I did. I woke up in the ambulance where I was told that I was going to be fine, and they were taking me to the hospital. Apparently, the bullet went in and out, meaning that it went on a straight path and didn't bounce around or break up inside of me, causing massive internal damage. I ended my trip then and there, and once I was able to fly home, I did. My friends always told me I was too trusting of strangers. Not anymore.